Hello, readers by eyes and by ears. This is Mari-chan, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I sincerely hope you all are doing well. I am, partially because I am extremely excited, but also deeply terrified of the series that we are about to delve into. Why? Just because I hear there's so much trauma in it. And I already read Arha, and the trauma there is just unfreaking imaginable compared to all other series that I've read. So anyway, we are finally opening up Remnants of Filth by Rou Bao 不吃肉, also known as Yu. And yeah, let's just get into this one, okay? I also want to inform you all, or for those who already know, give you a quick reminder that this series contains smut. So that means it will not be fully read on my channel, meaning all of the smut scenes will be excluded. And if you would like to hear them, you'll have to go and subscribe to my Patreon. Otherwise, you can keep enjoying on YouTube and those smut scenes can just be passed by. So let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Prologue. Chonghua had produced two young and promising generals as distinct as the Jing and the Wei, as different as water from flame. The one like water was named Mo Xi, a lifelong bachelor. He had an icy temperament and an ascetic air. The army had a betting pool regarding when General Mo would sacrifice his chastity, and it had long since grown into a fortune that could make any beggar rich overnight. Mo Xi remained a cornerstone of Chonghua's strength. The one like fire was named Mang, a perfect gentleman. He had a warm personality and smiled often. If he had owed a sack of army wages for every girl he'd kissed, he doubtless would have lost everything he owned ages ago, down to the clothes on his back. Later on, Mang turned his back on Chonghua and became a commander for the enemy nation. Before Mang turned traitor, there was a day when he was suddenly possessed by a strange whim. Grabbing a little booklet filled with his own writing, he ran to ask Mo Xi to add a few words. General Mo's hands were full with military paperwork at the time, so he only asked General Gu, "What's in it?" "All sorts of things," Mang said cheerfully. "Good food, interesting experiences, travel notes, weapon catalogs, and the trifles of life." Mo Xi accepted the booklet, took up his brush, and dipped it in ink to make his comments. "I also wrote about you," Mang added with a smile. Mo Xi's hand stilled as he looked up at Mang. "What about me?" "I wrote a little about our past," Mang earnestly replied. Mo Xi didn't say another word. After staring at Mang for a bit, he lowered those long lashes and expressionlessly inscribed two sharp and icy lines of formal script on the first page. "This book is forbidden. Transgressors will be punished." Chapter 1. Stain. At dusk, a light flurry of snow began to fall on Chonghua's border until it gradually blanketed the ground in a layer of pristine white. The wheels of lumbering carriages and the feet of passers-by left uneven trails across the expanse. The meat pie seller Wang Er Matsu shouted with all his might as his breath puffed out in dense clouds, meat pies, fresh out the oven." He clanged the gong next to his oven as he peddled his goods. "There's nothing thicker than the meat pies I bake, other than Gumang's face. Come here and get yours quick." Everyone who heard snickered to themselves. This pie stall had been in business for more than a decade, and a few years ago, Wang Er Matsu had sung a different tune indeed. Back then, he had crowed, look here, General Gu's favorite pies. My dear cousins, if you eat them, you'll be just as successful and invincible as General Gu, guaranteed." A strikingly outfitted cavalry troop slowly made their way toward him through the swirling snow, headed by a youth who looked to be about 17. Luxuriously dressed in brocades and furs, He was the picture of indolence, with his handsome and mischievous little face bundled beneath his thick fur collar. This young man was named Yue Chunqing, and he was the deputy general of the garrison troops. He was possessed of two profoundly formidable talents. The first was being very agreeable. As the ditty went, "What's the point of getting all mad? If I got sick, that would be real bad. No one's happy when I'm mad. It's such a pain and makes me sad." Yue Chunqing understood this concept to a T, and he hardly ever lost his temper. He was the most good-natured young master of them all. The second talent was making himself comfortable as possible. He never stood if he could sit, nor sat if he could lie flat. Yue Chunqing's favorite thing to say was, "I'll drink all the wine I've got tonight and mooch off my bros tomorrow." He never deprived himself when it came to enjoying nice things. He downed all his liquor the day he received it and took women to bed without wasting time on talk. As for patrolling, he'd have his fun, and then he'd patrol. The frontier fortress at the northern pass had many markets like this, most of which sold things like animal hides, herbal medicines, spirit stones, and slaves. These places weren't terribly interesting, but compared to the bitter tedium of army life, they made for a decent way to pass the time. "I'll take that seven-tailed spirit cat. Go buy that guhuo niao feather for me, too. The tumbleweed at that stall looks good. It'll definitely make effective medicine. Get me 10 baskets." As Yue Chunqing walked, he directed the retinue following him to purchase all sorts of goods. Although the members of the retinue felt uneasy seeing him shirk his responsibilities, they couldn't say much to a deputy general. Over the course of his walk, Yue Chunqing began to feel a little hungry and looked around for something to eat. He suddenly heard Wang Armatza shouting in the distance, his raucous voice ringing through the snow. "Meat pies for sale! Meat pies as thick as Gumang's face! Come here and take a look!" Upon hearing this sales pitch, a corner of Yue Chunqing's mouth twitched. "Hiya! This guy has the guts to use Gumang for his own ends? Doesn't he know that Gumang is a taboo subject with our commander, Mo Xi? If Mo Xi heard, we'd all be doomed." Yue Chunqing quickly led his horse forward and was about to scold the man when the strong, savory aroma of the meat pies hit him in the face. Just as Yue Chunqing's reprimand reached the tip of his tongue, he swallowed it, along with the drool about to drip down his chin. The stall keeper, Wang Armatza, looked up. "Officer, a pastry for you?" "I'll have one, I guess." "All righty." Wang Armatza nimbly grabbed a golden brown pie from the oven with his tongs and stuffed it into an oil paper bag, which he passed to the customer before him. "Here you go. Careful not to burn yourself. You gotta eat these pies while they're hot." Yue Chunqing accepted the piping hot pie and took a crackling bite. Scalding juice flowed out from the crispy golden brown pastry as the flavors of wheat dough, ground meat, and crushed peppercorn blossomed on his tongue. Their smoky scents filled the air in an instant, and he swallowed hungrily. Tastes as good as it smells." Yue Chunqing couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. "Doesn't it? Everyone knows my pastries are the best." Wang Armatza bragged in delight. "No matter how famous Gumang got way back then, he always came to my stall and ate a batch as soon as he returned to the city after a battle." Once he was done boasting, he made sure to add indignantly, "But if I'd known that Gu asshole would turn out to be a two-faced traitor, I'd have put some poison in those pies and nipped that in the bud for the good of the people." "Be careful with that kind of talk," Yue Chunqing said as he chewed. "Also, you'd better change up that slogan of yours." Wang Armatza's eyes widened. "Why's that, officer?" "Doesn't matter. Just be good and listen to what this officer says." Yue Chunqing took another huge bite of the meat pie, his cheeks bulging. "We'll be going to war with the Liao Kingdom soon, and I'm afraid our troops will be stationed here for a good long time. Watch out. If you keep shouting about Gumang all day," he snickered, "you might end up jabbing a certain dignitary right where it hurts." The dignitary Yue Chunqing spoke of was, of course, their commander, Mo Xi. Mo, granted the title Shi Hejun by the late emperor, had been born into the prestigious Mo clan. This clan had produced 4 such generals, including both of Moxi's grandfathers and his father. Having come from such a remarkable lineage, Moxi's innate spiritual power was, of course, extremely potent, and after studying under the Cultivation Academy's most severe elders, he'd attained the highest rank of general and commanded hundreds of thousands of soldiers. And he was a mere 27 years old. Due to his family's circumstances, Moxi's temperament was as cold and sharp as a knife's edge, and he was ever decisive and determined. His father had often warned him, "Overindulgence will blunt your blades, so do your work and ignore the maids." Thus, Moxi was assiduously ascetic and self-disciplined, wholly free from corruption. One could have said that he'd lived 27 years without ever making a single major mistake, except for Gumang. For Moxi, Gumang was like ink on paper or mud in snow, the suggestive smear of blood left upon the pristine white of a gentleman's bedsheets. He was the stain on Moxi's life. After nightfall, a clarion melody pierced the skies in the barracks of the frontier fortress. The opera singer's voice was languid and slow as it drifted, ghost-like, across the frost. Rain falls soft over Yuchu Pavilion. Sun shines down on Jinni Hall. Let wine and music flow for all. Mean although their lives may seem, matters of ants are not so small. The soldier guarding the deputy general's tent looked left and right, the very image of a startled quail. At the sight of a tall, black-clothed silhouette approaching, he couldn't help but pale and lift the tent flap in panic. Uh-oh, bad news, he cried out. What's up? Inside the tent, Yue Chenqing yawned atop the general's seat of honor and opened his eyes, propping his chin on his hand. Hiya! Look at the time. Deputy General, you should hurry and go on patrol. Stop watching the show. What's the rush? Yue Chenqing said lazily. There will be plenty of time after I'm done. Then he turned to the performers in the tent. Don't just stand there. Keep singing. The music floated up into the clouds, the singer's voice like a faint silken ribbon drawn out high and long. In that shade will a kingdom rise, a lifetime's work etched in his eyes. Qi Xuan's teachings only parted glean. When will the east wind wake me from this dream? Ayah! My dear Deputy General Yue! My good Deputy General! Please stop their singing! The personal guard said anxiously. What on earth is all this? Life is brutish and short, so we should find our joys where we can, Yue Chenqing happily chewed on his fingernail. Otherwise, our days will be sorely lacking in spice. But if Shi Hejun sees a display like this, he'll get angry again. Shi Hejun isn't here, so what are you worried about? Yue Chenqing chuckled. Besides, Shi Hejun stalks around looking dour all day long. He doesn't put any effort into cheering himself up. He's a grown man, but he still throws a fit if he hears me tell a dirty joke. How exhausting would it be to try and make him happy? Deputy General, the guard seemed close to tears. Lower your voice, please. Why? Because... The guard's gaze flitted toward the gap in the tent flap. Because, he stammered. Yue Chenqing sprawled out on the general's seat and even plopped Shi Hejun's silver fur coat on his head. Did Shi Hejun spook you guys? He laughed. Why are you stuttering as soon as you say his name? Yue Chenqing sighed. Then again, Shi Hejun surely is something. He's the one who wants to live like a monk, but he makes us all suffer in boredom alongside him. Look, in our whole company, there's not even a single female dog. This was true. In all of Chonghua's military, the branch under Shi Hejun had it hardest. Although the troop under his command didn't lack for food or clothing, the man himself was boring and strict, just as Yue Chenqing said. It would have been fine if Shi Hejun merely insisted on personally avoiding carnal pleasures, but he forbade his subordinates from seeking out fun with girls as well. Yue Chengqing clearly found the situation hilarious. He held back his laughter to sigh with a wholly feigned seriousness. He's got everything going for him, except for the fact that he's way too controlling. Look, he's an obsessive clean freak, overthinking with no hobbies or interests to speak of. What a waste of that handsome face. The guard looked like he was watching a disaster unfold before his eyes. Young Master Yue, stop talking, he blurted out. But Yue Chengqing didn't stop. In fact, he became even more excited. Don't you feel pinned up, like you're about to burst? While he's away, I'm going to take the chance to cut you some slack. Tonight, let's have the brothers go have all the fun they like. We'll open the gates and host a beauty contest by the bonfire. I want to crown the prettiest girl in the nearby villages. You want to crown who? A man's low voice cut through from outside. The tent flap lifted with a swish, and a tall man walked in, clad in silver armor that flashed like frost. His uniform was proper and neat over his wide shoulders and slender waist, and his long legs were wrapped in military boots of black leather. His refined and elegant features made an inedible impression as he looked up with icy sharp eyes. This was none other than the Xi Hejun whom Yue Chengqing had been having fun mocking, Mo Xi. Why had Mo Xi come back now? At first, Yue Chengqing was struck dumb. When he came back to his senses, he shuddered, bundling himself up tighter in the furs. General Mo! Deputy General Yue put on a show of being pitiful. Why didn't you tell us you'd be coming back early? Ah! This was due to Mo Xi, who, finding his whining unbearably disgusting, chose to summon a sword of spiritual energy and fling it a hair's breadth from Yue Chengqing's cheek. Having narrowly avoided decapitation, Yue Chengqing scrambled up from the general's seat. Xi Hejun, how come you're so violent? He demanded, pushing his hair out of his face. You're questioning me before I have a chance to question you. Tell me, why are there women among my troops? Mo Xi shot a glance at the petrified songstresses before turning back to stare at Yue Chengqing. You brought them here? Yue Chengqing initially wanted to keep complaining, but he quailed the instant he met Mo Xi's eyes. Don't be like that. I was only listening to a song, okay? A famous song from Lichuan. Does Xi Hejun want to hear it too? Mo Xi's expression was cold and annoyed. Obscene music, he said irritably. Drag them out. Thankfully, he didn't end that sentence with, and have them beheaded. Yue Chengqing went back to whining as he curled up atop the general's seat, the picture of misery. You're so cold-blooded and heartless. I'm going to tell my dad you were mean to me. Mo Xi glanced at him. You can also get out. Yue Chengqing was struck speechless. After Yue Chengqing left in sulky silence, Mo Xi sat down alone in the tent. Stripping off his black dragon skin gloves, he pressed pale, slender fingers to his temples and slowly closed his eyes. In the lamplight, he looked almost ill, his complexion sickly and pallid. That, paired with the restrained ruthlessness that always lingered in his eyes, made him look even more worn down. He looked as if many things weighed on his heart. Not long ago, he'd received a secret letter from Chonghua's imperial capital of urgent importance, a missive personally written by the current emperor of Chonghua and affixed with the blood seal that only Mo Xi could open. After this letter was delivered, Mo Xi had to read it 3 times over to be sure he hadn't misunderstood. Mang was returning to Chonghua. Even now, the letter was tucked away in Mo Xi's coat, warmed by the heat of his chest, pressed where his heart beat strong and steady. Mang was returning to Chonghua. This news was like a thorny bramble caught in his ribs, and it filled him with a prickling pain. Mo Xi furrowed his brow, striving to suppress his black mood, but in the end, that burning rage still poured out. His eyes snapped open as a long, leather-clad leg kicked out and overturned the table in front of him with a loud crash. Hiya, General Mo! The guard keeping watch outside the tent leaned in through the flap, uneasy with fear. Please calm yourself. It's only natural to play around at young Master Yue's age. It's this subordinate who failed to appropriately handle the matter and neglected to stop young Master Yue from listening to that opera. If you want to punish or blame anyone, you only need say so. But by all means, don't make yourself sick. Mo Xi whipped around. In the dim light, his eyes were like sparkling flame. Get out. Silence. No one is allowed inside without my express permission. Yes, sir. The tent flap lowered again, leaving a terrifying stillness on either side. The only sounds were the wail of the northern winter's wind, the movements of soldiers in the distance, the soft crunch of snow beneath military boots, and the whinnying of the war horses in the spirit beast encampment. Mo Xi turned his head to stare down at the mulberries rolling across the floor. It was as if those berries were the heads that Mang had personally plucked off these past few years. He wondered how this person, who had committed so many cruel, wicked, and vile acts, who betrayed his country, comrades, and friends, who had earned an evil reputation, blood debts, and deep hatred, could have the courage to return. How could Mang have the nerve to return? Mo Xi collected himself. Only after making a great effort to calm his mind did he take out the letter, worn ragged from repeated reading. The emperor had written in his upright, elegant hand, "The Liao kingdom wishes to declare an armistice. To demonstrate their sincerity, they will escort the traitorous general Mang back to the capital. Mang is of our Chonghua and once enjoyed our trust. Instead of repaying that trust with loyalty, he turned a traitor for his own gain. For the past 5 years, he has plundered his mother country, ravaged the peace of his native land, slaughtered his former comrades, and forsaken his past friends. Such crimes cannot be pardoned. In 10 days, Mang will return to the city in shame. With the need for vengeance so widespread, we cannot make a decision alone and urgently write to each noble lord for comment. General Mo, although you are guarding the nation from afar, you are a trusted aide of ours. Therefore, your timely advisement is sincerely requested. With regards." Mo Xi stared at the secret missive for a long time, then burst out into mocking laughter. Traces of bitter pain and deep hatred gradually appeared on his face. Should he be killed or kept alive for some other use? At this point, Mo Xi didn't want to care anymore. He and Mang had their fights and their grudges. They'd talked of their dreams and shared wine from the same bottle. Over the course of being acquainted for more than 10 years, from the days of their youth to the unfathomable changes later on, they'd weathered countless hardships together. Mang had been his companion, his rival, his Shishong, his comrade in arms. And in the end, Mang became an enemy he was meant to slaughter. Their relationship had been doomed to fragility since the beginning. After Mang turned traitor, Mo Xi broke off with him completely, turning his back without hesitation on years of friendship. Nowadays, when people spoke of them, they probably all said something like, "General Mo and Mang? They're as incompatible as heaven and earth, water and fire, a saint and a savage. Even love rivals would get angry at the sight of the other, let alone those two fighting on opposite sides of a war. They're sure to be at each other's throats for the rest of their lives." Deeply distraught, Mo Xi refused to think on this matter any further. Taking up the brush, he held it poised above the paper. Halfway through the word "execute," his hand shook. Ink soaked through the silk paper. The faint sound of a clay shuen started up outside of the tent. Some little brat must have been feeling homesick. He filled the entire encampment with the melancholy yearning as pale frost dusted the grounds. Mo Xi fell into a momentary daze, his black eyes flashing with an unreadable light. In the end, he cursed softly and flung down the brush to grab the secret missive. Flames burst from his palm, reducing the letter instantly to ash. As the ash danced in the air, Mo Xi exhaled, forming them into a messenger butterfly that could travel 1,000 miles. This subject once protected and recommended Mang, and thus must bear blame for his treason. As for the trial, This subject should avoid suspicion and abstain from comment. He continued in a measured tone. Morsi of the Northern Frontier Army wishes your Imperial Majesty well. He lifted his hand, and the spiritual butterfly swiftly flew off. He gazed in the direction in which it had disappeared, thinking to himself that, with this, his decade-long entanglement with Gu Mang was finally settled. Gu Mang had murdered so many Chonghua soldiers and broken the hearts of Chonghua's people. Now that he had outlived his use and the enemy kingdom was sending him back, the officials of the court would of course rush to take revenge. But Morsi had to stay at the frontier for another 2 years. It appeared that he wouldn't be able to watch Gu Mang's execution. Enemies, nemesis, adversaries. These were the final conclusions others would one day draw from their relationship. His face devoid of expression, Morsi thought perhaps no one else would ever know that he and Gu Mang, who appeared to be incompatible, irreconcilable enemies, had, in fact, slept with each other. Perhaps no one would believe it even if he said it out loud. Their ascetic and disciplined General Mo had once pinned Gu Mang to the bed and taken him ruthlessly. This immaculate saint had lost control on top of Gu Mang, sweat dripping down his chest as desire inflamed his eyes. As for the fearsome warrior Gu Mang, who seemed to have been born from the fires of war, Gu Mang had been fucked to tears in Shi Hejun's bed, parted his soft lips in a plea for Shi Hejun's kiss, and allowed Morsi to leave smudged marks across his rugged and muscular body. They were enemies, separated by a chasm of accumulated hatred only death could resolve. But before this had come to pass, before they had parted ways, these two youths had once been passionately entangled, until love became one with desire, until they were loath to part. Chapter 2. Gu Mang Bears It All. Not long after Morsi received the secret missive from the capital, the Emperor of Chonghua finally announced the news of Gu Mang's return, along with how he would be punished. Wang Shujun would be granted complete control over him. The news spread like wildfire across all of Chonghua. Although Morsi's army was stationed all the way on the northern frontier, they nevertheless found out a mere 3 days later. The northern frontier army exploded. On the surface, they were as solemn and calm as ever, but during breaks between patrols, almost everyone started weighing in. Morsi saw it all, and for once, he didn't stop them. He thought it perfectly normal that these soldiers would feel dissatisfied. After all, the Northern Frontier Army had once been the invincible army of Gu. A healthy majority of the soldiers had once risked their lives alongside Gu Mang. Their feelings about him were extremely complicated. Though their loyalties remained unquestioned, they had once wholeheartedly sworn allegiance to their commander Gu Mang, even though that same Gu Mang had once dubbed them the Wang Ba Army. Seriously, that wasn't a joke. Wang Ba as in tortoise, and Wang Ba as in bastard. Before Morsi took over, this army's roster had read like this. Liu Dazhuang, soldier of the Wang Ba Army. Zhang Dayan, squad leader of the Wang Ba Army. ... And so on and so forth. Bastards all the way down the line. First on the list had been Gu Mang, commander of the Wang Ba Army. Logically speaking, no one would want to enlist in an army with such a vulgar name, but that concern hadn't borne out. At the time, Gu Mang had been the most illustrious general of Chonghua. Most of the well-known generals were constrained by their own challenges, obligations, or pretensions, but Gu Mang was different. He was slave-born. He had no father or mother, no worries or cares, no ego to lose, nor any fear of death. If all of Chonghua's noble young masters took off their clothes and stood in a row, Gu Mang might not have been the most muscular, but he definitely would have had the most scars. He had fully deserved the title of Chonghua's Beast of the Altar. In those days, Gu Mang's deputy had always reprimanded him at the sight of his wounds. "You're the commander. Why do you always run to the front? Don't you know how to dodge?" Gu Mang would smile. His dark eyes were very bright, and his lips looked very soft. His voice was naturally smooth as silk as he cheerfully mollified his angry friend. My legs are too long. I have no choice but to run fast. No choice at all. His very presence seemed to bring laughter and sweetness to the battlefield, as though such places could be more than freezing cold and crimson blood. He remembered every one of his comrades' birthdays, and between battles, he often took the cultivators from his camp to make merry and drink wine in some little village. Sometimes, they'd be met with crafty villagers who charged sky-high prices, but General Gu never got angry. He merely laughed and tossed all his money on the table in order to buy his soldiers wine and meat. In the end, he'd yell, "Eat up, drink up. You'd better all stuff your faces and eat your fill. You're my precious darlings. If there's not enough money, I'll pay in other ways." Gu Mang was a man of his word. He traded fur coats for wine and spirit jades for meat, and once even took all of his military robes and armor and tossed them on the bar in exchange for Nuar Hong rice wine, at which point the army thugs started laughing and heckling him. "General Gu, we want beef too. Do you have anything else you could take off?" By then, he'd already stripped down to a single snow-white robe, but he still laughed and pointed at them. "Just you wait." "No way. General Gu, you wouldn't really take off your underwear too." "That can't be worth very much." Gu Mang didn't plan to take off his underwear, but it was true that he didn't have anything left. He bit his lip and thought, and before everyone's amused and shocked expressions, he scooched up to the pretty widow proprietress and planted a kiss on her cheek. The soldiers all stopped talking and stared. Even the widow was stunned, speechless, drops of wine plinking off her ladle. It took her a moment to snap back to her senses and start chasing after Gu Mang, ladle held aloft. "Shameless! You awful flirt!" Everyone roared with laughter. Amid the thigh-slapping and sympathetic wincing, the widow chased Gu Mang around the entire room. I'm serious, Gu Mang cried, begging for mercy as he ran. "You're beautiful! You're beautiful!" "I know I'm beautiful. You're not bad-looking either, young man, but you're way too fucking shameless. Couldn't you sneak out here alone and kiss me at night? Why do you have to do it in front of so many people? Pervert!" This pervert ran about in utter chaos, yet he made sure to shamelessly shout, Yes, I'll come over tomorrow night. Or I can stay here tonight, as long as you give us another 2 caddies of beef. Please, dear miss." "Pah! You've already asked me for beef on credit 3 times since you've been stationed here, and this is the 4th. Every single time, you say you'll come over tomorrow night. Do you think I'm gonna fall for your tricks?" The widow yelled back, her little fists punching the wooden bar so hard it cracked. The army ruffians were laughing so hard they were about to fall over. No matter how indignantly the widow spoke, in the end, Gu Mang was still able to use his pretty face and the promise of coming over tomorrow to secure another 2 caddies of marinated beef for his brothers. "General Gu, you sure know how to win people over." "Of course I do," Gu Mang said smugly, preening with delight. "I've gone through thousands of beautiful flowers. Everyone knows of my exploits." With a commander like that, it was no wonder a youth in those days grandly declared, "Who cares if they're called the Wang Bao army? Even if they were the Ji Bao army, I'd enlist in the Cock army for General Gu." His friends standing next to him turned up their nose. "Ayah, you read your classics in vain, I see. How vulgar. How would you make it elegant? If you're going to go with Ji Ba army, why not go with Ji Ba army? As in, cease battle?" "Huh, what a good name," the youth exclaimed in admiration. "I like it." "No way, I just made that up. Who would like a name like Ji Ba? Wouldn't you find it embarrassing? Go ahead and try if you don't believe me. Even a dog would get mad at it if you called it that." The youth laughed. "Never say never. Just because something doesn't exist now doesn't mean it won't in the future. If even an imperial army can be called Wang Ba, I don't think it's impossible that something else might be called Ji Ba in the future." Fortunately, Gu Mang didn't hear this discussion. Otherwise, he might have slapped the table with a triumphant yell and changed his title to Gu Mang, commander of the Ji Ba army, thereby making all his subordinates suffer alongside him. Amid the cruelty of war, only a little madman like Gu Mang would be inspired to joke around. In addition to dubbing his troops the Wang Ba army, he also personally crafted their flag, creatively cutting a tortoise out of a jade green banner, complete with a very realistic little tail. He cast a spell on the flag, and with every instant's time that passed, the tortoise roared, Wang Ba, Chonghua's pride, a mighty name known far and wide. In short, it was extremely embarrassing. The first time Gu Mang rode out to battle with this flag, the enemy general nearly laughed himself into an early grave. Nevertheless, before the day was out, Gu Mang's Wang Ba army had reduced the 100,000-strong opposing army to a sobbing mess. Gu Mang fought many more battles after that one, both large and small, and came away victorious every time. As a result, during the years that Gu Mang was a general, the enemies of Chonghua would pale at the glimpse of a tortoise's tail. The sight they dreaded most was, perhaps, that of a little tortoise flag raised up over the smoke of the battlefield as General Gu rode out, cleared his throat, and introduced himself with absolute seriousness. This humble one is Gu Mang, general of the Wang Ba army. I'm here to learn from your honorable selves. Failing to defeat this young cultivator was shameful enough. Even worse was having to snivel through one's report to one's emperor. The subordinate is truly incompetent and failed to defeat the Wang Ba army. It was the stuff of nightmares. As for Chonghua's soldiers, although Gu Mang was outrageous and mischievous, his charisma was unsurpassed. Many people revered him in those days, and some even took his nonsense "shitty names keep you safe" mantra as gospel. In accordance with the trend, many babies born during that time had the misfortune of being given shitty names. Chu Strong Root, Gen Zhuang, Xue Iron Pillar, Tie Zhu, Jiang Aching Balls, Dan Tong. When Mo Xi took over the Wang Ba army, the first thing he did was change its ridiculous name. He would never allow for his entry on the military roster to become Mo Xi, general of the Wang Ba army. Absolutely not. And so, the Wang Ba army was renamed the Northern Frontier Army and assigned to Mo Xi's command. The dark humor that had stood up to spilled blood and the smoke of war crumbled away, much like Gu Mang's glorious reputation. Those little tortoises that had shouted and yelled, Wang Ba, Chonghua's pride, a mighty name known far and wide, were like an absolute and fleeting joke. They were never seen on the vast battlefields again. The army's existence became a solemn one. There were no more flowers or nectar. No one who would strive to memorize any of the lowly soldiers' names. No one to take the men out to make merry. No one to buy them cheap wine with the clothes off their back. Battle regained its absolute and pitiless severity. An eternal winter had arrived. Although most of the Northern Frontier Army hated Gu Mang nowadays, perhaps that past was the reason they couldn't feel quite the same way ordinary civilians did when they spoke of him. This was especially true of those old soldiers who'd fought in the Wang Ba army with General Gu. Every time they said his name, a hint of something unreadable rose in their eyes. I really didn't expect him to end up like this. Everyone knows of Wang Shujuan's cruelty. I'm afraid it's an awful sign that His Imperial Majesty is letting Wang Shujuan deal with him. He'll definitely die a horrible death. A man of ambition wasn't necessarily disliked, but a traitor was certain to be universally reviled. Only when these veterans of the Wang Ba army gathered did they murmur about things that had nothing to do with hatred. As the night wore on, some of the ones who were getting on in years finally lost all enthusiasm. What a good man he was. If only certain things hadn't gone the way they had, then he wouldn't have— Shh! Be quiet! The nerve to mention such things! Do you want to die?" The old soldier shook his head out of his reverie with a yelp. As he realized what he'd nearly let slip, the drunken sparkle in his eyes vanished, and he couldn't help but shudder. The older soldiers continued chiding him. "Now we're working under General Moi, and Gumag is the person he hates most in the world. It's not as if you don't know his temper. If he heard you, none of us would be living to see morning." You're right. Silly me, getting confused as soon as I start drinking." The soldiers sitting around the fire pit fell silent and stared blankly into the flames, each of them lost in their own thoughts. After a long time, someone else sighed and said, "But everyone changes, I suppose. All we can say is that this is General Gu's fate." "How many years has it been? Why are you still calling him General Gu?" "Oh, right, I meant Gumang." It was a still night at the frontier fortress. A bonfire crackled, bursting with a stream of golden sparks more dazzling than the stars. The tipsy older soldier lay on the ground with his head pillowed on his arms. He gazed up at the starry sky and the twinkling Ziwei star, the jut of his throat bobbing as he muttered a few words no one else could hear. To be honest, it was only because of General Gu that I enlisted. I once even drank with him around a fire. I didn't put on any airs either. Back then, as I watched him laugh, I thought, if one day I could die for him in battle, it would be a good way to go. Who could have known he would end up meeting such a fate? Gone are the birds, discarded lies the bow. After making use of Gumang, the enemy nation was offering him as part of a gift of peace and giving him back to Chonghua. This man had lived through many turns of fortune and seen much of the world's beauty, but a single wrong move had left him a traitor. What was done was done. There was no turning back. Was this what it meant to reap what you sow? To be the architect of your own destruction? Returning to the topic at hand, although Gumang had come into a cruel fate, he had only himself to blame. It satisfied the people to see him unwanted by either side. For a while, almost everyone in Chonghua eagerly awaited Gumang's end. Whether he was to be beheaded, given death by 1,000 cuts, boiled alive, hacked to pieces, or drawn and quartered, even a little girl who had just learned to speak could lisp sycophantically after the adults. "We can't go easy on that disgraceful pighead." Thus, Gumang, General Gu, Chonghua's former heroic commander, Moxi's arch-enemy, the legendary man who had once been praised as the beast of the altar, had so pathetically become a disgraceful pighead. Chapter 3. Old Hatred. In the blink of an eye, the Northern Frontier Army had spent 2 years guarding the border. 100,000 troops set up camp for the night by the Fushui River. After one more long day of travel, they would return home in glory. The soldiers cooked their meals, fed their horses, and washed their clothes as a rosy sunset glimmered over the river's surface. The light shone down on the spirit beasts lying down by the river and the men bathing in the shallows. "Yo, help me scrub my back. We'll be going home tomorrow, and if I show up covered in mud, my mom's gonna curse me right to death." "Gee, you gotta help me shave later. I can't get it right on my own." "Vain, sticky brat. 3 years of marching, and I've never seen you care about your looks. Be honest, are you in a rush to go home and see that girl of yours?" A group was chattering happily in the shallow waters, heckling each other as they tidied their appearances, their eyes filled with unstoppable sweetness. Clad in robes from their mothers' hands, the subjects of those yearning dreams, these faraway sons were returning home. They would carry out their duties as they ought to. Whether it was honoring their parents or marrying a wife, all of them had futures to look forward to. Morsi was likely the only person in the whole army who had no such hopes. His parents were dead, and he had no wives. The entire capital of Chonghua longed for his return, but in a city ablaze with lights, not a single lamp was lit for him alone. Thus, Morsi's manner was as aloof as ever, his pale lips pursed beneath that handsomely defined nose. Even though the battle fires of the past few years had gone out, their dying embers remained in his dark eyes. This made him seem all the more ruthless and repressed, as if he'd walked right out of a snowy night, as if what constricted him wasn't his armored silver belt or his leather military boots, but rather rule and regulation. Shihejun, once we get back to the city, you can see Princess Mengzi again. Yue Chengqing had finished bathing and was walking up from the riverbank. When he saw Mo Xi, he beamed. You know what they say about distance making the heart grow. If you want me to kick you back into the river, go ahead and keep talking. Yue Chengqing shut up and gave Mo Xi a reverential bow. General Mo, I get the feeling you'll attain enlightenment in this lifetime. Ignoring him, Mo Xi stood on the riverbank and gazed at the distant mountains. He knew that just beyond these peaks lay Chonghua's imperial capital, which he had not seen in a long time. After a year of battles and another 2 guarding the frontier, he had spent 1,000 days and nights away from home. It was true that he didn't know how Princess Mengzi was doing. And as for Gumang, Morsi's eyes darkened. 2 years ago, Gumang had been sent back to the capital as a gift from the Liao kingdom preceding peace talks. Somehow, he had kicked up a huge ruckus as soon as he arrived. After the city gates opened and the procession came in, what we saw of the renowned General Gu left us totally speechless. It was really something. I'll never forget that sight. Morsi still wasn't clear as to what they had seen. Although he had certainly heard tell of the situation where he had been stationed, it had all been fragmented snippets of passing conversations. Besides, the soldiers revered him to the point that the talkative ones shut up as soon as he appeared and greeted him with utmost propriety, performing obeisance and addressing him as General Mo. Morsi couldn't say anything to that. He could only nod, stand there for a moment, and coolly walk away. Naturally, when he returned to his tent, what awaited him would be a sleepless night of melancholy, staring at the tent poles as they swayed noisily in the wind. Yue Chengqing had mumbled some things within earshot a few times, but what he said couldn't be trusted, since his stories changed with each telling. Morsi was very reserved and would never have asked of his own volition, so even now, he didn't know what exactly had become of Gumang. He only knew that Gumang was alive. That was enough. Everyone said Gumang was Morsi's archenemy. There was a rumor in Chonghua that went as follows. If the traitor Gumang were to be defeated someday, the best end for him would be to take a sword to his neck, because at least that meant he'd die quickly. Second best would be to be captured and brought back to Chonghua, because at least then he'd die successfully. The worst possible conclusion for him would be to end up in Morsi's hands in the thick of battle, because that was an end that did not bear imagining. It was said that Morsi had prepared 365 methods of torture, such that he could try a new one on Gumang every day for an entire year. These would ensure that Gumang suffered a life worse than the death he would be denied. Yue Chengqing had smilingly told this rumor to Shihejun himself, hoping to get a laugh. To his surprise, Morsi didn't find it the least bit funny. Instead, he closed his eyes for a moment, then scoffed. You think I would treat him like that? It was just a joke. But Morsi entirely ignored Yue Chengqing's explanation. He'd been jabbed where it hurt. In that tent empty of outsiders, and that overflowing madness and obsession, he raged. Don't be foolish. He chose this end. But now he's saying I forced him to it? That I'd take it out on him? That I'd make him live a life worse than death? Morsi's eyes flashed red as he snapped. Which one of us has been made to suffer a life worse than death? Doesn't he know? Yue Chengqing was rendered speechless, and he vowed not to mention it again. It looked like he had been right. Shihejun had been betrayed by his best friend, so even though he still appeared cool and collected from without, within, He had been driven to the edge. One more step and he'd lose his mind. It was true that Morsi despised Gumang, so much so that he wanted to personally tear open his ribcage and see for himself whether Gumang's blood was cold, whether his heart was black. He truly couldn't say if he felt something else as well, separate from that bone-deep hatred. He'd known Gumang for half his life. Far too much had happened in that time. Gumang was once a slave. He wasn't cruel by nature. He was only too focused on making a name for himself and too blindly devoted to upholding the code of brotherhood. Unfortunately, the entirety of the 9 provinces valued bloodline above all else. Even though the old emperor had taken pity on Gumang on account of his talents and made an exception to grant him the rank of general, after that emperor passed, his successor hadn't looked kindly upon the lowborn Gumang. He grew jealous of Gumang, doubted him, and stripped him of his authority. He even crossed the line Gumang couldn't possibly endure. Morsi had watched Gumang fall into the abyss with his own eyes. Morsi tried to persuade Gumang as a close friend, then argued with Gumang as a comrade. They were both assigned to the Bureau of Military Affairs at the time, and Gumang was in low spirits and barely came to work. Once, when Morsi found him, he was listening to music and drinking wine in a brothel, his head pillowed on a dancer's soft thighs. At the sight of Morsi, he closed those eyes that flickered with stars and flashed him a mirthless smile. "Shihujun, you've come." Nearly insane with fury, Morsi threw open the door and strode into the room. Amid astonished cries, he slapped Gumang across the face. "Do you want to rot like this for the rest of your fucking life?" Gumang was drunk. He grinned as he looped his arm around Morsi's neck and crooned. "Yes, noble Morgongte. Would you like to rot with me?" "Fuck off." Gumang burst into laughter. "It doesn't matter, after all. You're a noble, and I'm a slave. I know you think I'm filth. I know that no matter how hard my army strives, how much blood is spilled, or how many of us die, we're still meaningless in His Imperial Majesty's eyes. It's not our fault that we weren't worthy of learning cultivation in the first place, yet somehow, despite our birth, we still dared to try." After that, the emperor had dispatched Gumang from the capital, but Gumang never returned to report on his mission. People thought he must have died in some accident. Many of his maiden admirers even cried for him. For a long time, no news of his death reached Chonghua, until one day a military report came swift from the front lines saying Gumang had been seen in the Liao Kingdom's battle formations. Gumang had defected. The scandal burned through Chonghua like wildfire, setting everyone's temper ablaze. Only Morsi's heart seemed to freeze over. He didn't believe it. Not until he saw it for himself, over the misty waters of Dongting Lake, where ships and water demons clashed to kill. The Liao Kingdom's tactics felt so familiar that they shattered Morsi's composure. He had seen these monstrously fearless strategies countless times before, on the sand tables Gumang had once pored over, and during one of the Wangba army's glorious battles. Morsi told the commander in charge of the attack that they needed to call the barrier masters and switch to defensive tactics. They had to commit a total retreat and discontinue the fight. If they didn't, the whole vanguard would be buried at the bottom of the lake by the end of the day. "I know how he fights." But the commander ignored him. Who does Gumang think he is? Could a slave brat defeat a pure-blooded descendant of gods such as I? The grizzled, white-bearded noble's expression was full of arrogance. He didn't think much of Gumang at all. And so the fires of war blazoned without end. The imperial army that had weathered 100 battles unscathed under Gumang suffered their first complete and utter defeat before the Liao Kingdom's warships. Boats powered by spiritual energy exploded one after another, while water demons burst out of the lake to tear cultivators apart. Fire stained the sky. Blood dyed the water. Amid the wails of crushing defeat, Morsi mounted a sword by himself and flew to the Liao Kingdom's command ship. The inferno raged on, black smoke spiraling endlessly upward. The Liao Kingdom was a country that cultivated demonic magic, and the spells their cultivators used were savage and cruel. A crowd of hundreds struck forward to kill Morsi. "Hold it!" A familiar voice called out, and a figure sauntered out from the dark cabin. They met again. Gumang had grown more tanned, and his physique was more toned, but those eyes of his hadn't changed, black and bright, as if they could see through all the world's machinations. His torso was bare, his slim and well-muscled waist bound with layers of bandages, and he wore a black coat draped over his shoulder, a blood-stained ribbon tied around his forehead. He had pulled it off the dead body of an imperial soldier of Chonghua. Gumang leaned carelessly against the ship railing, narrowing his eyes as he looked ahead at Morsi. Then he grinned. "Shihejun, it's been a long time." The wind blew in coppery gusts. The war reports provided by scouts and the strategy at play in the Battle of Dongting Lake both suggested that the Liao Kingdom's newest general was none other than Chonghua's former beast of the altar. Although Morsi hadn't said anything, he had still refused to believe it. He thought, surely, Gumang couldn't be so awful. Despite all that had happened, the Liao Kingdom was evil, a deeply cruel nation that revered only war. Gumang might have left Chonghua, but no matter what, he wouldn't have gone to Liao Kingdom territory. Morsi thought that a person's nature never changed, so he refused to believe anything before he saw the man himself. But now, Morsi closed his eyes, swallowing thickly. After a long time, he only managed 2 words. "Gumang." Morsi's voice was low, on the verge of shaking. "So you've truly stooped so low." Gumang laughed in the blazing firelight, the wisps of black hair that framed his face fluttering slightly. He spread his hands into an almost flamboyant air. "What's wrong with this?" Morsi said nothing. "I think it's great. The Liao Kingdom values talent. Although it's not righteous to cultivate with black magic, everyone's treated quite fairly." As Gumang spoke, he pointed at the gold-edged blue ribbon on his forehead. "No matter how much of my life I devoted to your honorable country, no matter how many merits I achieved, I could never dream of attaining this kind of pure-blooded noble's ribbon, all on account of my birth." Gumang smiled. "But that's not true in Liao." "That's the merit ribbon," Morsi snarled. "It belongs solely to the descendants of the martyred heroes. Take it off." Gumang touched the blood-stained ribbon with interest. Is it? This was worn by a cultivator who looked pretty young. I cut off his head and saw this ribbon was quite well made. It'd be a waste on a corpse, so I took it for fun. What, do you want one too?" His lips curled in a malicious smile. "You should have one of your own. Why are you trying to take mine?" Morsi was practically incandescent with rage. "Take it off!" "Shihejun." Gumang's voice was syrupy sweet, but his tone was laced with dinner. "You're alone and surrounded. So where are your manners? You really think I wouldn't have the heart to kill you just because of our shared past?" A black dagger wreathed in dark mist appeared in his hand. "Almost all the men of your honored nation's vanguard have died at Dongting Lake today," Gumang said. "Morsi, even if you're strong, you're still only a deputy general. You couldn't persuade that dumbass old noble commander of yours. Even after so many died, he didn't come here to beg for mercy, while you've come to endanger yourself." Gumang smiled at him. "Is it because you want to be buried with the deceased soldiers of Chonghua?" Morsi didn't answer. After a moment of silence, he walked toward Gumang. His military boots left tracks through the fresh blood on the deck. "Gumang," he finally said, "I know that Chonghua owes you, as do I. You've done too much for me, so I won't fight you today." "I'd like to see you try," Gumang scoffed. "You asked if I wanted to be buried with the soldiers of Chonghua who died today. If my death will convince you to leave the Liao Kingdom," Morsi said, stepping closer, "then yes, My life is yours. Gumang wasn't smiling anymore. He stared, eyes dark. I really will kill you. Morsi was yet unfazed. He merely glanced at Gumang's forehead and the blood-stained blue and gold ribbon. Slowly, he lowered his gaze to Gumang's face. Then kill me. And afterward, remember to turn back. This was the last time Morsi tried to bring Gumang back to shore. The white eagle swooped off the ship's mast, and light flashed from the dagger. There came a muffled ripping sound. Blood gushed from the wound in spurts. The cold blade had stabbed into Morsi's heart, viciously tearing it apart. I did say I would kill you. The dagger was still buried in Morsi's chest. Gumang suddenly sneered. Who do you think you are? What right do you have to lecture me? You think that if you die, I'll feel guilty and turn back? Don't be a fool. Head held high, he glanced disdainfully down and sighed. As a general, as a soldier, and as a person, you can't be too attached to past affections. As he spoke, he slowly got down on one knee, resting an elbow carelessly on his raised leg as he took hold of the dripping dagger and pulled it out with a squelch. Fresh blood splattered out. Gumang tilted Morsi's chin with the tip of the bloody dagger. Don't think I didn't know what you were planning. Shihajuan, you weren't actually reluctant to fight me. You knew you had no chance of victory, so you chose to bet on my conscience with your life. Blood gradually soaked through Morsi's clothes, but at that moment he didn't feel any pain, only cold. So cold. He closed his eyes. No, if I had the choice, I would never have even thought of fighting you. Light was something you gave me. Warmth was something you brought me. All the blood that races through my heart is because of you. Without you, I wouldn't have made it to today. Sorry to disappoint, Gumang said blandly. Morsi, if I were you, and I ended up in your situation, I'd prefer to bet on my ability to bring my enemy down with me rather than naively try to persuade my opponent to turn back. We were brothers once. This is the last thing I can teach you. The final scene Morsi remembered before losing consciousness was a Liao Kingdom cultivator swooping in on a sword to say anxiously, General Gu, reinforcements are coming from the northeast. An army of Meng's healers. Look. Morsi didn't hear the rest of it. Unable to hold on any longer, he fell forward and collapsed onto the blood-stained deck. After this bloody battle, Chonghua confirmed that the traitorous general Gu Mang had defected to the Liao Kingdom and was serving the darkest country in the 9 provinces. The old general had made a grave mistake. The army was devastated. Of a vanguard that had been 10,000 strong, fewer than 100 cultivators returned. Morsi lay unconscious for weeks before waking. Gumang had slipped a knife between his ribs, but it hadn't been enough to make him stop and turn back. He remembered the words Gumang had said long ago, before he left the capital. Morsi, for me, the way up is a dead end. I have nowhere to go. I can only fumble toward hell. Gumang, that's enough. Gumang ordered a jug of wine from the waiter. Breaking the clay seal, he smiled as he poured 2 cups, one for himself, one for Morsi. Gumang's eyes twinkled as the cups clinked, sending wine splashing. Have another drink on me. From now on, your Gumang Gaga is going to be a bad guy. At the time, Morsi had shaken his head in exasperation, finding him unbearably flippant. Every word out of his mouth sounded so tongue-in-cheek. Morsi had known Gumang for many, many years. His heart was so soft that he hesitated to stump on an end. How could a sweet child like that become a bad guy? And what had happened in the end? The subordinates of this sweet child had killed Morsi's comrades. That sweet child himself had almost killed Morsi. Fortunately, Princess Mengsa arrived in time to save you. That dagger was a holy weapon from the Liao Kingdom, tempered with demonic poison. If she had come any later, I'm afraid you would have died. Your wound will scar. You'll need to spend the next few months resting. Morsi didn't listen to anything else the healer said. He looked down at the bandages wrapped around his chest. The necrosis had been cut away, but something else seemed to have been gouged out of his heart alongside the dead flesh. He felt empty and hurt, dissatisfied and hateful. It wasn't until much later, when Gumang suffered the consequences of his actions and was sent back to his old capital, that Morsi felt the wound on his chest finally stop bleeding. But it still ached. Many years later, the night before the Northern Frontier Army returned to the capital, Morsi sat alone and sleepless in his tent, unconsciously wiping slightly damp eyes. He turned his face to the side, faint candlelights streaming through the muslin lampshade to illuminate his sharply defined profile. He closed his eyes. Without a doubt, he was a loyal subject, and Gumang was a traitor. Morsi loathed him and knew he was guilty. But between his trembling lashes, Morsi seemed to see Gumang from the past, when they were both at the academy, that smiling face both sweet and mischievous. When he was happy, a sharp little canine would appear, and his eyes would glitter brighter than any star Morsi had ever seen. Back then, the sun shone splendidly, and the elders droned on, while Gumang sprawled out over the desk, sneakily writing picture books starring himself and the male lead, smug and delighted because all the young ladies loved him. Neither of them had foreseen a future like this. Chapter 4. Morsi puts on an act. The next day, the army returned. The whole city bustled with activity as residents of all ages poured out onto the streets as far as the eye could see. Northern Frontier Army, welcome back! As the procession entered the city, a strange atmosphere spilled forth from both sides of the road. It was as if water had been poured onto a pot of sizzling oil, then swiftly capped with a wooden lid to seal all the crackling excitement beneath it. People lowered their heads respectfully, but they still snuck glances out of the corner of their eyes to peek at the elite army riding past. Morsi wore an Imperial Army uniform, his steel-toed army boots in their stirrups. Other than his belt and vambraces, which glinted cold silver, he was in all black. Xiaojun is so handsome, I can't stand it. I'm dying. I think he just looked at me. Stop kidding yourself. How could he have eyes for anyone but Princess Mengzi? But he hasn't married the princess yet. He turns 30 this year, and he doesn't have a wife or a betrothed, or even any concubines. Can't I at least fantasize? Seriously. As for the officers and soldiers, their expressions were much more cheerful than Morsi's as they waved happily at the civilians lining the streets. Yue Changqing even delightedly accepted flowers from maidens to put in his hair. Only after Morsi glanced at him in warning did he sulkily resign himself to holding and sniffing the flowers, all in all looking quite pitiful. It was a long road from the city gates, and they couldn't reach the imperial palace for a while yet. Yue Changqing didn't behave for very long at all before he started twirling his flowers again. He grinned flirtatiously at the onlookers and called out to them as the procession advanced. "Hey, ladies! Aren't you lovely? This humble one is seeking concubines, food and lodging included." "Yue Changqing!" Morsi snapped. Yue Changqing covered his mouth. In the sunlight, the Northern Frontier Army's glinting weapons and flashing armor were a magnificent sight as they rode through the capital. They were still Gumang's old soldiers, but they could no longer behave as they once had. In the old days, when Gumang returned victorious, he had waved and teased from his horse at their head, while the happy, relaxed soldiers behind him had laughed as they accepted wines and desserts from the civilians. But Xiaojun was their commander now. This man didn't even smile, so no one else dared to let loose. The slow march from the city gates ended up taking more than an hour. Upon their arrival, the army was greeted with a long and tedious merit ceremony, in which they had to kneel and kowtow and give thanks. It was all terribly irritating. Even when Morsi finally made it to the evening feast, he had neither peace nor quiet. As Yue Changqing would have said, he found himself obligated to deal with those young mistresses in a manner chaste yet aloof, reserved yet courteous. On that note, the first time Yue Chunqing joked about Morsi's chastity, Shi Hejun had made him transcribe maidenly virtues 100 times as punishment. Without speaking a word aloud, Shi Hejun had said clearly, Yue Chunqing, is the problem that you don't know the word chastity? Come here, I'll let you learn to your heart's content. But no matter how many times Yue Chunqing sniffled through the words, maidenly virtues are boundless, womanly grievances are endless. The joke that Shi Hejun was chaste yet aloof, reserved yet courteous, still secretly spread through the entire army. Everyone else thought so too. Shi Hejun was already 30 years of age, but he still refused to marry. All to wait for Princess Mengzi. That much was obvious from the situation at the feast. A crowd of little ladies from noble houses was chatting around Morsi, but he wouldn't even look at them. Shi Hejun, it's been a long time. Shi Hejun, you seem to have lost weight. Shi Hejun, what do you think of this pendant I'm wearing today? In this group of high-born young ladies, the most provocative was Princess Yan Ping, the younger sister of Princess Mengzi. She had a gorgeous figure despite having only recently come of age, and she gazed around with eyes that overflowed with amorous intent. She walked toward Morsi with a smile, her lips as tender as a juicy berry. When Yue Chunqing spied this from afar, he didn't bother to swallow his dessert before grabbing a friend he hadn't seen in a while. Hey, what do you want? Come, look over there, Yue Chunqing said excitedly. Isn't that Princess Yan Ping and Shi Hejun? What's interesting about that? Princess Yan Ping doesn't stand a chance. No. I want you to see the legendary chaste yet aloof, reserved yet courteous Shi Hejun with your own eyes. Aren't you tired of copying maidenly virtues? His friend asked. Yue Chunqing was the sort of person who never learned his lesson. Grinning, he dragged his friend closer to eavesdrop on the general and the princess. Brother-in-law. Still smiling, Princess Yan Ping came to a stop in front of Morsi. Her tone was flirtatious from the instant she opened her mouth. Morsi lowered his lashes, pausing at this form of address, and then chastely turned to leave. Yan Ping hastily stopped him. Brother-in-law, you've been standing here expressionless this whole time, ignoring all the girls. Are you cross that my sister isn't here? He paused before replying, aloof. Princess, you're mistaken. I am not wed. I'm just saying it for fun. Controlling his temper, Morsi was reserved in his response. This is no laughing matter. All right, don't get mad. My sister's health hasn't been especially good these past few years. She caught a cold last night. Otherwise, she definitely would have come to see you. Morsi knew Princess Mengzi's poor health was inextricably linked to himself, so he courteously asked, How is she? Ha! Yue Chunqing cackled. See, I told you so. Yue Chunqing's friend felt that he was laughing too loudly. No matter how noisy the banquet was, there was still a chance he would attract Shi Hejun's attention, and even if Yue Chunqing didn't mind copying those trite passages of womanly conduct, his friend wouldn't be able to take the hit to his pride. He clapped a hand over Yue Chunqing's mouth and dragged him away. Notwithstanding their departure, Princess Yan Ping and Morsi's conversation continued. Yan Ping kept smiling. After spending 2 years along at the frontier, you still think only of my sister? Don't worry. She only had a headache and a fever. It's the same issue. As you know well, she'll be fine with some rest. Morsi said nothing. Let's be honest. Given my sister's health, how could she handle Shi Hejun if she didn't recover first? As Yan Ping spoke, her admiring gaze swept covetously over Morsi's long legs, then lingered on the high bridge of his nose. She sighed. If my sister doesn't get better, she'll never be able to marry. Are you really going to spend your whole life saving yourself for her? Morsi remained silent. Wouldn't that be an awful shame? The princess pressed close to Morsi, redolent with powdery sweetness, her dark hair decked in jewels and a rouge-colored peony drawn between her brows. With a smile, she deliberately leaned forward, her pale bosom heaving. Why don't you give me a try? I'm all grown up now. I'm no less than her. Yan Ping tried to wrap her soft arms around his waist. It's just spending the night together. Don't take it too seriously. As she giggled, the pale pink tip of her tongue flicked over her lips ever so briefly. You'll like it. That was the end of it. Don't take it too seriously. This sentence topped the list of sayings Morsi hated more than anything. Princess Yenping had not only failed to attract him, she'd jabbed him exactly where he hurt most. Morsi glanced at her, pausing, then said coldly, "Move aside." "Hey, you... But Morsi had already walked away from her with a frown. Amid the fluttering tassels of Fei Yao Terrace, Morsi grabbed another Liu glass cup from a servant. Its contents glimmered with an amber hue. His leather-clad legs didn't relax until he strode to the terrace's edge, where he leaned against the red lacquer railing to watch the city lights. Free of that maddening hall, he caught his breath and took a sip of the berry wine in the cup, the jut of his throat bobbing. Morsi had been subjected to many years of the lady's favor, but he still didn't like it, nor was he used to it. In the past, few people had admired Morsi. When he walked the streets, hardly anyone had snuck glances at him. Back then, he had been terribly bad-tempered. How bad, exactly? In comparison, the current Shihejuan was an absolute sweetheart. Later, there had been a massive upheaval within his family, and everyone had thought this young master of the Mo clan was doomed. The other noble cultivators ignored him, and the cultivators of common birth didn't dare approach him. Only Mang, that lunatic who didn't fear death, was willing to be his comrade. He was the only one who chose to keep that floundering young master company and offer him comfort. Don't worry, even if you're no longer a noble young master, you'll always be you. There's an ember in your heart, and sooner or later it will glow. I can see it, and others will too. In the end, Morsi survived the crisis and escaped from the Mo clan's shadow. He fought at every frontier, achieving more military merits than even his ancestors. No longer did anyone think of him as the only son of the Mo clan. They only treated him as the venerated Shihejuan. More maidens began to think highly of him. After Gumang defected, the maidens changed their type. They all flocked to admire Morsi instead, and some even sighed. It's good for men to be a little stuffy. There's more honesty that way. At least they won't let us down like Gumang. Even though Shihejuan has a bad temper, he tells it like it is. If there's anything he wants to rant about, he'll say it outright. He won't ever put on an act. A brothel girl once went so far as to smack a table and heroically proclaim with a hand on her hip, "Shihejuan is the most innocent man I've ever seen. I swear on my honor, if Shihejuan came to bed with me, I'd pay him before I'd take his money." As it turned out, Shihejuan really did come the next day, not to bed her, but to shut down the brothel with a murderous look on his face. "Seducing Shenjuan, how shameless! Your punishment is to go become women of good families." After Morsi finished shutting down the brothel and berating them ferociously, he left in a rage, and also left behind a crowd of brothel girls wailing that they'd never again sell their bodies because Shihejuan had persuaded them to leave the trade, tearfully attesting to the incomparable goodness of Shihejuan's character. It made no sense. People love to take a person who seemed decent and good and enshrine them in their hearts, pinning all their beautiful fantasies on that person's shoulders just to bring a little light to themselves. But Morsi had no wish to be consecrated as their boring, holy idol. He wasn't as perfect as those girls believed. There were miserably wretched things in his past, things he couldn't speak of to anyone. But no one understood. So what Gumang had said was right, but it was also wrong. Morsi did indeed throw off the Mo clan's shadow to shine on his own merit in front of everyone's eyes, but he knew very well that this glory belonged solely to the flawless Shihejuan of their imaginations. It had nothing to do with that trapped and lonely youth from long ago. From beginning to end, only Gumang had ever walked toward that downtrodden young master, toward that youth with an uncertain future. Only he had ever been sincerely happy to be reunited with his little Shurdi from the academy, reaching out to him in delight with a little canine peeking from that brilliant smile. Before the warmth of a bonfire, he smiled and said, "It's been a long time, Monsieur D. Can I sit with you?" "It's been a long time. Can I sit with you?" Suddenly, someone behind Morsi asked a very similar question. Morsi's fingertips shook, the wine in his Liuli cup almost spilling. He turned his head as if in a dream and saw, beneath the moonlit blossoms of the foxglove trees, a familiar silhouette calmly watching him on Fei Yao Terrace. Alrighty, you guys, so that concludes the reading of the first 4 chapters of Remnants of Filth. I don't know about you guys, but it's already so heavy. Oh my God. But I can see, a little bit of, comedic relief or just funny moments in there. But man, Jesus. I'm glad I'm rereading this one, which again, I only read through like volumes 1 through 3. The first thing that I want to know is, why has Mang turned traitor? It's never something that's just so black and white, like, oh, he was just with us and then one day he wasn't with us anymore. There's definitely more to the story, and I will be happy for us getting more information on that as we read, because from everything that we've read thus far, other than that exact moment when he actually stabbed Morsi, he seemed to be a very kind, considerate person. So to hear that he defected, I'm just kind of like, okay, why though? Which I think we got a little bit of a glimpse of it concerning the new emperor. They clearly don't have as much respect for him as the previous emperor. So something happened with that. The next thing I wanted to tell you guys, because it was mentioned about the Northern Frontier Army being, but previously being called the Wangba Army. So it said that it was the Tortoise Army, or also bastard. First, I want to tell you guys the tones. It's Wang, so second tone, and then just Ba, Wang Ba. Apparently, this is an insult in China. I'm not going to go into the details of the origins of that. If you'd like to know, maybe another time I can, if you request it, or you could just Google it. But yeah, a lot of my notes here are on Chinese things that were said in the book. So the next thing is talking about the Nuar Hong rice wine that was drunk. First, I just want to let you all know that Nuar, so Nu, that's going to be the third tone. And it's not new, but like just say ooh and then try to make an E sound while keeping your lips in that ooh sound. So Nu, so Nu, vocal fry, R going up, that's daughter, Nuar. And then Hong is also going up, that's red. So this is red daughter rice wine, or just daughter red rice wine. Anyway, so now the next thing, when one of the soldiers was making the joke, basically saying like we could be called the Jiba army and I'd be okay with that, I'd still join because of Gumang. Ji is a chicken in this scenario. So, they're from tortoise to chicken. But sorry, of course, I forgot to mention that, of course, another word for chicken is cock, and cock can also be a man's penis. Then also, it's familiar or similar to ji ba, which is what the person had mentioned, which means to cease battle. So that's what that whole thing was on page 30. So then we go to page 32 because they're still talking about these ridiculous names, which was all inspired by Gumang, calling them the Wangba army. It mentions all the names that people started naming their children in inspiration of this man, which I think is so cool. By the way, the influence that he had on people to do something so silly. Not that I'd do that myself. So the first one it mentioned was Chu Strong Root Gunjang. So because I'm reading the English version, I don't know which chu they were using, so that's just what it is. But for strong root, gunzhuang, the pronunciation for that is going to be gun. So you're just going to be the first tone, and then zhuang. Gun is going to be the root, and then zhuang is going to be strong. The next name it mentioned was Xue Iron Pillar Tiezhu. So Tiezhu is the iron pillar. Tie, vocal fry, is how you say iron, and then ju is part of pillar. and pillar is 支柱. So a lot of times though in Mandarin they actually shorten words, not saying like the entire thing. So you just get 柱,铁柱,学 iron pillar. That's funny. The next one, Jiang aching balls dan tong. This was probably the funniest one to me. So first off, to ache or to feel pain is tong, which is the second part of that. But dan is egg. And you know, balls are like eggs. So egg hurt. Aching balls, dan tong. And both of those are the fourth tone going down. Now let's go to page 35. Again, like I said, this one's going to be not maybe this entire book, but this first video, because there were so many things. It's going to be a lot of the Mandarin stuff. So on page 35, when they were talking about basically Mang has outrun his use, you know, that older guard who was just reminiscing about Mang and how great he was and was just like, man, if things hadn't turned out like this. One of the things that was mentioned was, gone are the birds, discarded lies the bow. So just so you all know, this is a line from the records of the grand historian, clan of Goujian, king of Yue. And basically it refers to the desolate fates of those who have outlasted their use. So the way that you say, gone are the birds, discarded lies the bow, or the way it was said in the thing is, 鸟尽弓藏. So 鸟, that's bird, vocal fry. 尽, that's the fourth tone, and that's the one that's like to use up or wholly, exclusively. And then 弓 is bow. 弓箭 is usually bow and arrow anyway. And then 藏 is the rest. So 鸟尽弓藏, 鸟尽弓藏. So the last bit of Mandarin stuff we're going to do is actually going to be the names of the characters that have been introduced. And by the characters that have been introduced, I don't actually mean every single one of them. I just am going to stick for now with the ones that have been repeatedly introduced. And of course, that's going to be Mo Xi, Gu Mang, and Yue Chengqing. So, Mo Xi, his name is Mo Xi. So Mo is ink, which is interesting. I see that Rou Bao likes to use Mo because we have Morjan, and it's the same character for ink. And then Xi is extinguish. So ink extinguish, basically. And I'll be interesting to see ultimately like how that plays into his character, because a lot of times these Danmei people, authors, Danmei people, will make names according to like the character of the person. And so I'm like, okay, extinguishing ink, what exactly does that mean at the current moment? I'm not really going to theorize anything other than, of course, in the prologue, Gu Mang had written about their lives and their history or whatever. And then at first, I guess it was fine. But then he was like, nope, this book is forbidden. So maybe extinguishing that ink. I don't know. We'll see. So then aside from calling him Mo Xi, he could also be called Xi Hejun. So that's his title, which in the book, it says that means son in a literary way. So now we go to Gu Mang. Gu Mang is Gu Mang, Gu Mang. So Gu means to basically look after, to take into consideration, to concern oneself with. And then Mang means bewilderment. So I'm kind of getting that already just from like the mentions of how he was in the past with his people. He was, concerned for their well-being, taking them out to get wine and food and stuff and celebrating. And I'm sure we'll get more on that. And then there's the bewilderment, which right now I'm the one feeling bewilderment, wanting to know exactly why he defected. So we'll see how his name ties into him. And then, of course, he has the name Beast of the Altar, which is, I don't think that's in the back of the book, but is Shen Tan Meng Shou. Shen Tan Meng Shou. So Shen Tan Meng Shou. And the last person we have is Yue Chengqing. So Yue is high mountain. Chun is like early morning, basically. And then qing is clear. 月澄清. So we have 莫西顾忙月澄清. Okay. That is all for the Mandarin, and that is pretty much all for my thoughts. I hope you all have enjoyed these first couple of chapters. I can't wait for us to dig into more so that I'll have more to say at the end of my videos, less about a whole bunch of Mandarin stuff, even though I don't mind that, and just more about the story. So let's just see what happens, because I want to know more about this betrayal and all that jazz. 我爱你们